the third part of qualifying. Despite this being a frustrating session for Checo, all of the teams can take some positives from the lap being reinstated, as they now know that they have the power to lobby the FIA if they believe that a mistake was made. But in terms of looking at the statistics, I think Checo just really hates Hungary. And clearly, so does his boss Helmut Marko, who was exceedingly grumpy after qualifying, completely roasting Checo, saying that the Mexican was acting as if he were in the summer break already. Ouch. The statement from Marko just outlines the toxic nature of the Red Bull environment and shows that despite Checo having had a very strong season so far, it will never be quite enough unless he beats Max consistently, which, as we know from his time fighting the likes of Carlos Sainz, Pierre Gasly and Alex Albon, is a very difficult task. Now, coming back to what I was talking about Checo really disliking Hungary, he's been eliminated here 7 years in a row before Q3, and his record at the Hungaroring in terms of the races compared to other tracks is pretty lackluster as well. Of the 11 times that he's raced here, he has only scored points in 3 of them, having retired 3 times as well, including that monstrous crash in the damp in 2014, and was left unscathed but with no points 5 times. Checo is just not a fan of Hungary. Also eliminated in Q2 were the 2 Haas drivers, Lance Stroll and Zhou Guanyu. This is third best qualifying of the season. Now on to Q3, and shockingly, it was George Russell who stuck it on pole for the first time in his Formula 1 career, going completely under the radar and beating out Carlos Sainz to the top spot of the grid, as Carlos Sainz had done back in Great Britain when he took his maiden pole. Carlos ended up ahead of Ferrari teammate Leclerc, who was arguably in a better position on Sunday as he was on the racing line, whereas Carlos was quite a far way off. Lando Norris qualified a phenomenal 4th, his equal best qualifying of the season, proving that the McLaren upgrades made last weekend have made a big difference and have significantly improved McLaren's performance, with Daniel Ricciardo also making it into Q3 with 9th place. The 2 Alpines covered the 3rd row of the grid, the team's best qualifying this season, and Ocon's equal best finish of the season in 5th as well. Lewis Hamilton was 7th, somewhat out of place on the grid compared to his Mercedes teammate, but he could just not get to grips with the cold Hungary conditions, despite having 8 victories to his name there. And Valtteri Bottas was in P8, breaking his 6-race streak of not making it out of Q2. But the real shock of Q3 and of qualifying in general was from Max Verstappen, who suffered with an MGU-K failure and could not put in a competitive lap time because of a lack of power, lamenting this power unit issue later on, but finding a different issue in the media pen after qualifying, complaining about the use of track limits in a somewhat confusing rant which criticised the FIA for treating the drivers like amateurs. This is one of the issues that I have with Max in general. He always claims that there's someone or something out to get him, and tends to complain about somewhat nonsensical issues in a less than eloquent manner. But on to my driver of qualifying, and it has to go to George Russell. Absolutely no surprise there. The Brit has been having the season of his life, and has far surpassed expectations from critics, fans, and even probably his own team alike into the 2022 season. And this pole is yet another affirmation that George is just on the next level. In a similar style to Carlos Sainz's maiden pole position a few races ago in Great Britain, George flew completely under the radar, only having been in the top 5 in free practice sessions once all weekend, and having had a rough time of it in the damp FP3, as should frankly be expected of George now. He just pulls this type of inexplicable result completely out of the bag, and is well deserving of this pole position. Now, onto the team of qualifying, and it has to be Alpine, with their excellent 5-6 in quali. The team pulled ahead of McLaren in the Constructors' Championship last weekend, and this third row lockout put the team in the prime position to take a hefty handful of points for their battle for fourth in the Constructors' Championship. Finally, for my struggle of qualifying, and it is Sergio Perez. The Mexican ran into rather the spot of bother on Saturday, with the combination of the blocking from K-Mag and the deleted time, so he never seemed particularly secure. And with the Max Verstappen failure on top, this has been a very poor day for Red Bull. This has been an unfortunate qualifying session for the Austrian team, as they decided to take new power units for both of their cars, not incurring a penalty though, as they decided to take the power units within their allocated number for the year. Also taking a new power unit prior to the Grand Prix was Pierre Gasly, from his dismal qualifying spot of 19th, and he would start from the pit lane. Now onto the race itself, and it was sadly for me and for all Ferrari fans, Max Verstappen, who once again took the victory, thanks to a spectacular blunder by the Scuderia, or as they were later dubbed on social media, Screwderia. George Russell, who finished third in the Grand Prix for his 12th top 5 of the year, led away from the line, despite the early threat of rain, whilst the Red Bulls moved up 2 spots each, and Lewis Hamilton jumped the Alpines, all in the opening lap. Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez continued to carve through the midfield from there, with the two performing overtakes at turn 4 on adjacent laps on Fernando Alonso, with Max also passing Ocon at turn 1 on lap 7, before Checo did the same 2 laps later. By lap 12, both Lewis and Max had got up to the back of Lando Norris, who lost out to the 2 title contenders of last season at turn 1 and 2 respectively, with Sergio Perez doing the same a lap later. George pitted from the lead, and Max pitted from 5th on lap 17, the race leader seemingly dummied into doing so by Carlos Sainz, the Spaniard doing the same though a lap later. But it was a very slow stop for Carlos, and it nullified the opportunity for the overcut on George Russell. Sergio Perez pitted for the first time on lap 19, coming out all the way down in 10th, Lewis Hamilton doing the same a lap later, while Carlos Sainz made an overtake on Esteban Ocon. Verstappen jumped both Alpines, who were yet to pit, on lap 20 and lap 21, moving up into 4th, as his teammate recovered some places further down the standings, overtaking Bottas into turn 1. Leclerc made the overcut work on his teammate Carlos Sainz on lap 22, coming onto the medium tyre. Moving ahead to lap 31, and the race had begun to settle when Charles Leclerc, who had been eyeing up a move on George Russell, swept sublimely around the outside of the Brit and into the lead of the race. Verstappen pitted for the second time on lap 39, coming out in 6th, but disaster for me and all of Italy would come on lap 40, as Charles Leclerc was once again led astray, not by his rivals, but by his own team, who made the ludicrous decision to pit Charles onto the hard compound tyre despite it being slippery and icy cold. Charles had had a perfect race up to that point, but was once again completely shafted by his own team's strategy. He does everything he can to win after a difficult weekend in France to swallow, and time again his team does not respond with that same tenacity. The amount of memes that I saw about the team after the race was ridiculous. There was one which used the image of Mattia Binotto, whom I've heard rumours about that he may be fired at the end of the season, pointing at Charles Leclerc after the dreadful strategy at the British Grand Prix, with the caption, "This is the worst day of your life, the worst day of your life so far." Even the drivers in the cool-down room were mocking the decision to go onto hards. Is it that difficult? I think that this might even be worse than Sebastian Vettel going off at the German Grand Prix in 2018 at this point, because at least you can only solely blame the driver. It started so well for Ferrari this season and has just completely fallen off a cliff. Australia, Carlos spun out and retired. Imola, Carlos was spun out by Daniel Ricciardo and retired, and Leclerc spun from second and ended up in sixth. Spain, Leclerc retired from the lead with an engine issue, and Carlos ended up fourth on poor strategy. Monaco, poor strategy for Leclerc. Azerbaijan, double DNF with Leclerc in the hunt for the win. Great Britain, poor strategy for Leclerc, who ended up fourth. France, mistake from the lead for Leclerc and poor strategy for Sainz. And now Hungary, yet more poor strategy for Leclerc. I really have no words for how bad this season has been so far for Ferrari. But back to the racing itself. And Leclerc was overtaken by Max Verstappen on his ice-cold hards for third on the lap after the fatal pit stop. Before Max Verstappen spun at turn 13, but managed to regain momentum very swiftly indeed, and to re-overtake Leclerc only 3 laps later. Perez pitted on lap 43 with an ultra-swift 2.1 seconds stationary. Now, Lewis Hamilton made the correct strategic decision on lap 52, pitting onto the quicker softs and passing Sainz and Russell to take P2 with no trouble. Now, was that so difficult? Further down the field, George Russell made a move work on the ever-slowing Charles Leclerc on lap 54, before the poor Monegasque pitted for the third time, the Ferrari team cutting their losses and pitting Leclerc for a set of softs, falling to 6th, behind Perez as well. So, the top 6 was Verstappen, who took his 8th victory of the season, with an admittedly excellent recovery drive, extending his lead in the championship to 80 points. 80 points! I think that this may end up being one of the most dominant seasons in Formula 1 history. Mercedes picked up yet another double podium. This is the team's best 2 races since the consecutive 1-3s of Portugal and Spain last year. George Russell has now moved up ahead of Carlos Sainz in the Drivers' Championship, and as the Spaniard finished in 4th place. Mercedes are now only 30 points behind Ferrari, and with more results like this, they will end up being more likely to take the championship than the Scuderia. Sergio Perez finished in 5th, ahead of the strategy-stricken Leclerc, and is now 5 points behind the Monegasque going into the summer break. Now onto the rest of the field, and the midfield battle between Alpine and McLaren was reignited today, as Norris took 7th and Ocon with Alonso and Ocon in pursuit. Lando pitted initially on lap 15, dropping to 16th place thanks to a very slow stop. Alonso doing the same on lap 22, onto the hard tyres, which, as we know, would prove very difficult to heat up. But the battle for the best of the rest did the same two laps later, as Ocon pitted, coming out ahead of teammate Alonso, who was embroiled in a battle with Daniel Ricciardo,